I'm Amanda Wilson, 27, and family dinners at my parents' house always carried a certain tension beneath the surface pleasantries. That night was no different, until Dad casually mentioned between bites of pot roast, "Did that money help you get through those tough months after graduation?" I froze mid-bite, genuinely confused. "What money?" I asked, automatically turning to Mom. Her face drained of color so quickly, I thought she might faint. The silence that followed changed everything. If you're watching this story right now, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more family secrets that were never meant to be revealed. Trust me, this one gets complicated. Our family always presented well on the surface. My father, Richard Wilson, built his accounting firm from scratch, preaching financial independence to his children as if it were gospel. "No handouts in this family" was practically our household motto. Dad believed struggling built character, and he wore his own humble beginnings like a badge of honor. He expected all three of us kids to follow his example: work hard, save aggressively, and never ask for help. Mom, Barbara, was the balancing force. Where Dad was stern, she was gentle. Where he demanded independence, she quietly offered support. She managed the household with precision, stretching Dad's earnings to create the comfortable suburban Boston home where we grew up. But there was always something in her eyes, a quietness, a secret worry, that I couldn't quite place as a child but recognized more clearly as I grew older. My brother Michael, the eldest at 30, was Dad's pride and joy. He followed the Wilson blueprint perfectly: business degree, steady corporate job, sensible investments, and a growing retirement account. At family dinners, Dad would beam as Michael discussed his latest promotion or smart stock purchase. They spoke the same language of financial security and conventional success. Jessica, my younger sister at 24, was the family rebel. An artist with vibrant pink-streaked hair and an ever-changing collection of tattoos, she rejected Dad's practical world for one of galleries and creative expression. Their relationship was strained by her career choice and what Dad called her financial recklessness. Jessica lived in a tiny apartment in the artistic district, constantly hustling for commissions and exhibition opportunities. Then there was me, caught somewhere in the middle. I'd chosen a creative field, graphic design, but approached it with Dad's practicality. After graduating from college 4 years ago, I struggled to find stable work. Those first 2 years were brutal. I lived on ramen and coffee, worked freelance jobs that barely covered rent, and avoided family dinners when possible to escape Dad's thinly veiled disappointment. "Have you considered accounting?" he'd ask whenever my finances came up. Michael could put in a word at his company. But I persisted, building my portfolio and client list until I finally landed a contract with a respectable marketing firm. For the past 18 months, I'd been financially stable, not wealthy, but independent. I thought Dad had finally accepted my career choice, or at least stopped worrying about it. I was wrong. Our family dinners were a monthly ritual, sacred to Mom, who insisted we maintain connection despite our differences. These gatherings followed a predictable pattern. Dad and Michael would discuss business. Jessica would share creative news that Dad would politely dismiss. Mom would serve food and mediate tensions, and I would navigate the middle ground, trying to translate between the business and creative worlds of my family. But lately, I'd noticed changes. Mom seemed more withdrawn, Dad more irritable. They rarely looked at each other directly, and when they did, the glances were charged with unspoken tension. Something was fracturing in their relationship, but no one acknowledged it. We all maintained the performance of family harmony. The day of that fateful dinner, I drove to their house with the usual mix of anticipation and dread. The New England autumn had painted the trees in brilliant reds and golds, a beautiful backdrop to the growing unease I felt. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed Dad's luxury sedan and Michael's practical SUV already parked. Jessica's beat-up Honda was nowhere in sight, probably running late as usual. The house stood just as it always had, a handsome colonial with perfect landscaping and warm yellow light spilling from the windows. It looked like a home from a magazine spread about successful American families. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering strength for the evening ahead, unaware that this particular dinner would tear away the carefully constructed facade our family had maintained for years. When I walked through the front door, the familiar smell of Mom's cooking welcomed me, but the atmosphere felt different. Thicker somehow, charged with an energy I couldn't name. Mom greeted me with a hug that lasted too long, her body tense against mine. Dad called a distracted hello from his study. Michael emerged from the kitchen with 2 glasses of wine, handing me one with a look that said, "Brace yourself." "What's going on?" I whispered. He shrugged, but his eyes told me he sensed it too. Something was off. Something was about to break. Jessica arrived 15 minutes late, bringing the scent of cigarettes and paint thinner with her. Her latest canvas had been giving her trouble, she explained as she rushed to wash her hands. Mom bustled around setting out the final dishes while Dad emerged from his study, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. The family portrait was complete, and we took our usual places around the dining table. The evening started with the customary small talk. Michael described his recent business trip to Chicago, speaking the corporate language that made Dad nod with approval. He'd been put in charge of a new project, something about market expansion and quarterly projections. The details blurred together as I sipped my wine, but I didn't miss how Dad clapped Michael on the shoulder, his face glowing with pride. "That's my boy," he said, moving up the ladder just like I knew you would. Jessica picked at her food silently until Mom prompted her to share her news. She straightened up, a flash of excitement breaking through her usual cynical expression. "Actually, I have some good news," she said, tucking a strand of pink hair behind her ear. The Westfield Gallery downtown is featuring 3 of my pieces in their upcoming contemporary showcase. It's a pretty big deal. They only select a few local artists each year. Mom's face lit up. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." "Isn't that wonderful, Richard?" Dad nodded and offered a tight smile. "Congratulations. Will they be paying you for this feature?" Jessica's expression faltered. "It's about exposure, Dad. Getting my work seen by the right people." "Exposure doesn't pay rent," Dad replied, cutting into his pot roast with surgical precision. "But I suppose it's a start." The familiar tension settled over the table. Mom jumped in to defuse it, asking about the gallery opening date and promising to attend. But I noticed she wasn't eating, just pushing food around her plate. Her usual social grace seemed strained, and she avoided looking directly at Dad throughout the conversation. When the spotlight turned to me, I shared news about a new client who had extended my contract for another 6 months. It was stable work with decent pay. Something I thought would please Dad. "It's with that sports equipment company I mentioned last time," I explained. "They liked my initial designs so much they want me to rebrand their entire product line." Dad nodded, his expression unreadable. "Graphics, Still drawing pictures for a living." Mom quickly interjected. "Amanda's doing very well, Richard. Her designs are in stores across the country." "I'm sure they are," Dad replied, his tone suggesting that success in my field somehow didn't count. "But there's always going to be someone younger willing to do it cheaper. Not much security in that world." I felt the familiar burn of frustration. 4 years out of college, and he still couldn't accept my career choice. "Actually, Dad, I've built a solid reputation now. Companies are specifically requesting me, not just anyone with design software." He made a non-committal sound and redirected the conversation. "Speaking of your post-college years, I was looking through some old bank statements the other day." His voice shifted to something casual, yet pointed. "Those first couple of years must have been tough. Rent in Boston isn't cheap, especially on a freelancer's income." I nodded cautiously, uncertain where this was going. It was tight for a while, but I managed. Dad took a sip of water, his eyes never leaving my face. "Did that money help you get through those tough months after graduation?" The question hung in the air, genuinely confusing me. I'd scraped by on my own earnings, took on side gigs waiting tables, even sold some furniture when things got really tight. But no one had given me money. "What money?" I asked, turning instinctively to Mom. The change in her demeanor was instant and alarming. Her face, usually warm and composed, drained of color. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her fork. Dad's eyes narrowed as he tracked my gaze to Mom, whose reaction had answered a question I didn't even know to ask. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Jessica stopped mid-bite, looking between us. Michael cleared his throat, but said nothing. Something significant was happening, and no one seemed prepared for it. Barbara. Dad's voice had hardened. Is there something you want to explain? Mom's eyes darted around the table, landing everywhere except on Dad. I think we should discuss this later, Richard. No. Dad's hand came down on the table, not quite a slam, but firm enough to make the silverware jump. I think now is exactly the right time. Apparently, I'm the only one who doesn't know what's going on in my own family. We all sat frozen, caught in the crossfire of a battle whose parameters we didn't understand. Mom's chest rose and fell rapidly, her breath coming in short bursts. Dad's jaw was clenched so tight, I could see the muscle working in his cheek. And I still had no idea what money they were talking about. Dad's confusion had morphed into something darker, a barely contained fury that made the air in the dining room feel electric. He turned to face Mom fully, his voice dangerously quiet. I found the transfers, Barbara. $25,000 over 3 years, sent from your personal account to Amanda. His gaze shifted to me. Money we never discussed. Money that apparently never reached its destination. Mom's hands twisted her napkin into a tight rope. Richard, please. No, he cut her off. No more secrets. I want to know what's going on. My mind raced back through those difficult post-graduation years. The month I almost couldn't make rent and ate nothing but instant noodles for 2 weeks straight. The winter my heating broke and I couldn't afford repairs, sleeping in 3 layers of clothing. The countless times I considered calling my parents for help but didn't because of Dad's mantra about financial independence. Never once had Mom sent me money. I would have remembered that lifeline. Mom, I said gently, I never received any money from you. Not once. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I was trying to help, she whispered. You were struggling so much. But I never got any help, I insisted, pulling out my phone. I can show you my bank statements. No large deposits, no mysterious funds. Nothing. Dad's expression shifted from anger to confusion. $25,000, Barbara. Withdrawn in increments from your personal savings account. The account I thought we used for household emergencies. He turned to me. Are you saying that money never reached you? I shook my head firmly. Never. Jessica, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly pushed back from the table. Wait, so Mom was secretly sending Amanda money while I was literally selling my paintings on the street to make rent? Are you kidding me? Mom flinched. Jess, it wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Jessica demanded, her voice rising. I've been struggling just as much as Amanda, maybe more. I've had to take odd jobs, move 3 times because I couldn't afford rent increases, even sold my car last year to pay for supplies. But apparently there was secret family money flowing around that I wasn't worthy of. Michael, ever the peacekeeper, placed a hand on Jessica's arm. Let's all calm down. I'm sure there's an explanation. I'd like to hear it, Dad said, his voice cold. All eyes turned to Mom, who seemed to physically shrink under the collective gaze. She looked trapped, cornered by her own actions. The money was meant for Amanda, she began slowly. I saw how much she was struggling. Those tiny apartments, the long hours, how thin she got that first year. Her eyes pleaded with me for understanding. A mother can't just watch her child suffer. So you went behind my back, Dad said, after we explicitly agreed that the kids needed to learn financial independence. Your rules were too harsh, Richard. Mom's voice rose unexpectedly. Not everyone can build themselves up from nothing the way you did. Sometimes people need help. Then we should have discussed it, Dad countered. As a couple. As parents. Instead, you created a secret account and siphoned off money for years. I felt a growing sense of dread. But Mom, if you sent me money, where did it go? I never received anything. Mom's excuses became increasingly muddled. She mentioned bank transfers, cash envelopes, even checks she claimed to have mailed. But her story had holes. Dates that didn't match up. Amounts that fluctuated in her telling. Show me the confirmation emails, I suggested. Or the cash checks. Mom's silence was damning. Jessica leaned forward. Mom, where did the money actually go? Mom's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth with her hand, a sob escaping through her fingers. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Barbara, Dad's voice had softened slightly in the face of her distress. Just tell us the truth. Where is the money? Mom took a shuddering breath, her eyes downcast. Some of it went to Jessica. Jessica's head snapped up. What? I never got any money from you, Mom. Except that one time you helped with my security deposit and the emergency dentist visit last year. 5,000, Mom admitted. I sent you about 5,000 over the past 3 years. Small amounts when you were really struggling. A new tension filled the room. If 5,000 went to Jessica and none to me, that left $20,000 unaccounted for. Dad's voice was deadly quiet. And the rest of it, Barbara? Where's the other $20,000? Mom's confession about secretly helping Jessica landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of confusion through our family dinner. Jessica sat back in her chair, visibly processing this revelation. 5,000, she repeated. But that's just the dental work and the apartment deposit. That doesn't add up to 25,000. Dad's accountant mind was already calculating. $20,000 still missing, he said, his voice clinically precise. Barbara, I need answers. Now. Mom pushed away from the table and stood, her hands gripping the back of her chair for support. I've kept a separate account for years, she admitted, her voice barely audible. My own savings from the household budget, little bits here and there. Dad's face reddened. A secret account? For how long? 15 years, she whispered. The room went silent. 15 years, more than half my parents' marriage. Mom had been squirreling away money in secret. Dad looked as if he'd been physically struck. 15 years, he repeated, his voice hollow. What else don't I know about my wife? About my family? Michael, ever the practical one, tried to redirect. Mom, the 20,000. Where did it go? Mom sank back into her chair, seeming smaller than I'd ever seen her. I needed it, she said vaguely. For personal matters. Personal matters? Dad's voice rose. What kind of personal matters require $20,000 in secret? It's complicated, Mom replied, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Uncomplicate it, Dad demanded. The tension in the room was suffocating. I remembered snippets of overheard arguments over the years, hushed phone calls Mom would end abruptly when someone entered the room, her occasional unexplained absences. Pieces of a puzzle I'd never thought to assemble until now. Richard, please, Mom pleaded. Not in front of the children. We're not children anymore, Mom, I said gently. And I think we're past the point of keeping secrets. Something in my voice must have reached her, because she closed her eyes briefly, then straightened her shoulders. I'll explain everything, she said. But I need a minute. With that, she pushed back from the table and hurried from the dining room. We heard her footsteps on the stairs, then the closing of a door upstairs. Dad stared after her, his expression a complex mixture of anger, betrayal, and something that looked almost like fear. Without a word, he stood and followed, his footsteps heavier on the stairs. Left alone in the dining room, the three of us siblings exchanged bewildered glances. The food on the table had gone cold, forgotten in the wake of these revelations. Did either of you know about this? Michael asked. Jessica and I shook our heads. 5,000, Jessica mused, rubbing her temples. That's all I ever got, and I thought it was just Mom being nice in emergencies. I had no idea she was sending you money too, Amanda. She wasn't, I reminded her. That's the whole point. I never saw a penny. Michael had been unusually quiet throughout the entire confrontation. Now he stared at his plate, avoiding our eyes. "Michael?" I prompted. "You're being weird. What do you know?" He sighed deeply. "Dad helped me with a down payment on my house," he admitted. "Last year. $50,000. Jessica's fork clattered against her plate. "50,000? Are you kidding me? While I was selling plasma to buy art supplies." "It was a loan," Michael defended. "I'm paying it back with interest." "Oh, how generous of you." Jessica's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Meanwhile, I'm drowning in credit card debt because no one offered to loan me anything." "Dad's always been clear about his financial philosophy," Michael said stiffly. "Work hard, save, be responsible. I did all that. And I didn't because I chose art." Jessica's eyes flashed. "That's such bull." "Stop it, both of you," I interrupted. "This isn't about who got what. There's something bigger happening here." From upstairs, we could hear the muffled sounds of our parents arguing. The occasional raised voice penetrated the ceiling, though we couldn't make out the words. It was surreal. In 27 years, I'd rarely heard them fight openly. "Mom's been hiding money for 15 years, I said quietly. "And now, $20,000 is missing. That's not about us kids. That's about their marriage." Michael nodded slowly. "They've been different lately. Dad working later, Mom more withdrawn." "I thought they were just getting old," Jessica added. "But maybe it's been building for years." The sound of a door slamming upstairs made us all jump. Heavy footsteps descended the stairs, and Dad reappeared in the dining room doorway. His face was ashen, his usual commanding presence diminished. "Your mother will be down in a minute," he said flatly. "She has something to tell all of you." He moved to the liquor cabinet in the corner of the dining room and poured himself a generous scotch, something I'd rarely seen him do outside of special occasions. Whatever Mom had told him upstairs had shaken him to his core. We waited in uncomfortable silence until Mom appeared, her face tear-streaked but composed. She'd clearly been crying, but had pulled herself together. She carried a small wooden box that I recognized from her dresser, the place she kept her most treasured possessions. "I need to tell you all something," she said, her voice stronger than before. "Something I should have been honest about long ago." When Mom returned to the table, the wooden box clutched in her hands, we all fell silent. Even Jessica, usually quick with a sarcastic comment, seemed to recognize the gravity of the moment. Mom sat down carefully, placing the box in front of her like a shield. "The money," she began, then paused to steady her voice. "The money didn't go to Amanda. Or only to Jessica. Most of it went to my sister." "Linda?" I asked, surprised. Aunt Linda lived on the West Coast, and we rarely saw her. She'd made brief appearances at family events over the years, but always seemed to be passing through rather than truly present. I had vague childhood memories of a woman with Mom's eyes and a louder laugh, bringing exotic gifts from her travels. Mom nodded. "Linda has problems. She struggled with gambling for years. It started small: slots, poker, betting on sports. But it escalated. She'd win big, think she had it under control, then lose everything." Dad made a disgusted sound in the back of his throat, but didn't interrupt. "About 3 years ago, she hit rock bottom," Mom continued. "She lost her job, her apartment, everything. She had loan sharks threatening her. She was desperate. So you sent her my college fund." Dad's voice was like ice. "No." Mom looked horrified. "I would never touch the kids' education money. This came from my personal savings. Money I'd been setting aside for years from the household budget. Small amounts here and there that wouldn't be missed." $25,000 isn't a small amount, Barbara," Dad said. Mom's hands twisted in her lap. "It accumulated over time. I was careful. I never took enough to impact our lifestyle." "That's not the point." Dad's voice rose again. "The point is you kept secrets. Major financial secrets. From me. Your husband." The weight of this revelation hung heavy in the air. Mom had been maintaining a shadow economy within our family for years, siphoning off resources for her troubled sister while maintaining the facade of the perfect suburban wife. "Why didn't you just tell Dad?" Michael asked. "Why all this secrecy?" Mom and Dad exchanged a loaded glance, suggesting a history I wasn't privy to. "Your father and Linda have history," Mom said carefully. "Years ago, before you kids were born, Linda asked to borrow money from us. A significant amount." Dad's jaw tightened. $10,000 he supplied, which she never repaid. Not 1 cent. "She was going through a divorce," Mom defended. "She was in a bad place. And I was building a business from nothing," Dad countered. "We weren't exactly flush with cash ourselves, but I agreed to help as family, and she took advantage. So when she needed help again, I pieced together. You knew Dad would say no." Mom nodded miserably. "He made me promise, after that first time, that we would never give Linda money again. He said she was a black hole that would drain us dry if we let her." "I was right," Dad said flatly. The pieces were falling into place. Mom's secret account, the diverted funds, the lies about helping me financially. "What about the rest of the money?" Jessica asked. "You said you've been saving for 15 years. 25,000 can't be all of it." Mom opened the wooden box she'd brought down. Inside, I could see it was empty except for a few photographs. "I sold my jewelry," she said quietly. "My grandmother's pearls. The diamond earrings Richard gave me for our 20th anniversary. My mother's wedding ring." Dad's head snapped up, genuine shock registering on his face. "You sold your mother's ring? When?" "Last year," Mom admitted. "Linda needed money for rehab. A good facility in Arizona. It was her best chance." "Did it work?" I asked gently. Mom's silence was answer enough. "She left after 2 weeks," she finally said. "The money was gone. Just like always." I felt a sudden surge of protectiveness toward Mom. Despite her deception, I could see the pain etched in the lines of her face, the desperate hope that this time her sister might be saved, the crushing disappointment when history repeated itself. "Mom," I said, moving to kneel beside her chair. "Why didn't you tell me? I would have understood." She stroked my hair like she used to when I was small. "You were struggling so much yourself. And I was ashamed. Ashamed that my sister couldn't get her life together. Ashamed that I was going behind her father's back. Ashamed that I couldn't fix everything for everyone." I looked up at Dad, expecting to see his anger softening in the face of Mom's obvious distress. Instead, his expression had hardened into something resolute and cold. "Barbara," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "This isn't just about the money. This is about trust. For 15 years, half our marriage, you've been living a double life. Making financial decisions without me. Lying to my face when I asked direct questions." "Richard," Mom began. "I'm not finished," he cut her off. "You sold family heirlooms. Jewelry I gave you as tokens of our life together. All to enable your sister's addiction. And now you've dragged our children into this mess." "Dad," Michael tried to intervene. "Maybe this isn't the time." "No, it's exactly the time," Dad insisted. "No more secrets. No more lies." He turned back to Mom. "How much in total, Barbara? How much have you given Linda over the years?" Mom's voice was barely audible. "About 70,000. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. $70,000, secretly diverted over years from our family's resources. "I need some air," Dad said abruptly, pushing back from the table. He paused at the doorway, looking back at Mom with an expression I couldn't read. "When I come back, we're going to discuss what happens next." The threat was implicit in his words. After he left, Mom turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Amanda, I need you to understand. I need you not to tell your father everything I just told you." "Mom, he already knows," I said, confused. She shook her head. "Not everything. There's more. Things that would end our marriage for good." I found myself at a crossroads, torn between loyalty to my mother and the growing conviction that secrets had damaged our family enough already. Dad returned to the dining room 15 minutes later, his face composed but his eyes still stormy. He'd clearly used the time to collect himself, to formulate a response to Mom's revelations. The tension in the room was palpable as he took his seat again, placing his hands flat on the table as if steadying himself. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice controlled, "about trust and marriage and family, about the values I thought we shared." Mom sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on her empty plate. "Before we discuss anything else," Dad continued, "I need to know if there are any other secrets I should be aware of. Anything else you've been hiding from me, Barbara?" The question hung in the air. I watched Mom's internal struggle play across her face, the desire to protect herself warring with the weight of years of deception. I remembered her plea to me just minutes earlier, her claim that there were things that could end her marriage. In that moment, I made my decision. "Dad," I said quietly, "Mom has been helping Aunt Linda for years. But it's not just about the money. Linda has a gambling addiction. She's been in and out of rehab, and Mom has been trying to support her recovery." Mom's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. Dad frowned. "I gathered as much. But that doesn't excuse." "Dad," I interrupted gently, "addiction is a disease. Aunt Linda needs help, not judgment. And Mom has been carrying this burden alone because she knew how you felt about Linda." "This isn't about Linda's problems," Dad insisted. "This is about your mother's deception. 15 years, Amanda. 15 years of lies. Because you gave her an impossible choice." The words burst from me with unexpected force. "You made her choose between her sister and her husband. Between family loyalty and marital honesty. What was she supposed to do?" Dad's face reddened. "She was supposed to respect our partnership. We built this life together, made decisions together. At least that's what I thought." "You didn't give her room to disagree," Jessica chimed in, surprising me with her support. "It was always your way or no way, Dad. Follow the Richard Wilson life plan, or be considered a failure." "That's not fair," Dad protested. "I've only wanted what's best for this family." "What you thought was best," Michael corrected, his usual allegiance to Dad wavering. "But maybe Mom had different ideas about family obligation." Dad looked stunned to find himself suddenly outnumbered. "So, you're all taking her side? After she lied to all of us for years?" "There shouldn't be sides," I said. "We're a family, but families can disagree about priorities and still respect each other." Dad turned to Mom, who had remained silent throughout this exchange. "Is that how you see it, Barbara? That I forced you into deception?" Mom finally raised her eyes to meet his. "I made my choices, Richard. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't abandon my sister. Not even for you." "And the jewelry?" Dad asked, his voice softening slightly. "Your mother's ring?" "Linda needed real help," Mom said simply. "Professional help. It was expensive." "And did it work?" Dad asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer. Mom shook her head. "She left the facility after 2 weeks. Said she could handle it on her own." Her voice cracked. "She always says that." The fight seemed to drain out of Dad, all at once. He looked suddenly older, the lines in his face deeper. "You should have told me," he said, but the anger had faded from his voice, replaced by something that sounded like hurt. "Would you have helped her?" Mom asked. Dad was silent for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But you never gave me the chance to try. Because you forbade any contact with Linda years ago." Mom's voice rose for the first time. "You made it clear she was unwelcome in our home, in our lives. She stole from us." Dad's composure cracked. "That last time she visited, before Amanda was born. She took cash from my wallet. Pawned your silver necklace. Who knows what else. She was sick." Mom cried. "She needed help, not exile. So you chose her over our marriage." Dad's statement hung in the air, a devastating assessment of 15 years of secrets. "I chose both," Mom said quietly, "as best I could." The silence that followed was broken by Jessica's voice, uncharacteristically gentle. "Mom, has Aunt Linda ever gotten better? Even temporarily?" Mom's shoulders slumped. Brief periods. She'll call, excited about a new job or apartment. She'll sound clear, focused. But it never lasts. Because you're enabling her, Dad said, but without his earlier heat. $70,000 over 15 years, and she's no better off. I had to try, Mom insisted. She's my sister. And I'm your husband, Dad said simply. Or at least I thought I was. The implication of his words wasn't lost on any of us. Mom's face drained of color again. Richard, she whispered. What are you saying? Dad stood, pushing his chair back deliberately. I need time to think. About what marriage means to me. About whether I can stay in a relationship built on deception.
Dad, no, Michael pretested.
You can't be talking about separation, Dad supplied. For now. I'll stay at the lake house for a while. Over money? Jessica demanded. You'd end a 30-year marriage over money? Not over money, Dad corrected. Over trust. Over partnership. Over the fundamental basis of our life together. Mom rose on shaky legs. Richard, please. We can work through this. Maybe, Dad conceded, but not tonight. Not while I'm still trying to process the fact that the woman I've loved for 3 decades has been living a double life. With that, he walked out of the dining room. We heard him climbing the stairs, presumably to pack a bag. Mom stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and grief. The carefully constructed world of our family was fracturing before our eyes, and none of us knew how to stop it. The sound of Dad's car pulling out of the driveway left a silence, so profound it seemed to have physical weight. Mom remained standing, staring at the space where Dad had been, as if she could will him back through sheer concentration. Michael paced the length of the dining room, running his hands through his hair in agitation. Jessica sat with her head in her hands, and I felt a strange, unexpected calm settle over me. Perhaps it was shock, or perhaps it was the clarity that sometimes comes in moments of crisis. Either way, I knew what needed to happen next. Sit down, Mom, I said gently, guiding her back to her chair. Michael, stop pacing. Jessica, look at me. They all responded to the authority in my voice, a tone I'd rarely used with my family. Dad will come back, I said with more confidence than I felt. But right now, we need to talk. Really talk, with no more secrets or pretending. What's left to say? Jessica asked bitterly. Mom's been bankrolling her gambling addict sister while we all struggled. Dad's walked out. Family dinner's officially ruined. It's more complicated than that, I insisted. Mom was trying to help someone she loves. Her methods were wrong, but her heart was in the right place. Mom gave me a grateful look, tears welling in her eyes again. The problem wasn't the help, Michael observed, ever the practical one. It was the secrecy. The separate accounts. The lies. Exactly, I agreed. And that's what we need to address. Not just Mom's secrets, but the family culture that made her feel she had to keep them. What does that mean? Jessica asked. It means Dad's black and white thinking. His rigid rules about money and success. The way we all walk on eggshells to avoid disappointing him. I turned to Mom. And it means your instinct to protect everyone, even when honesty would be better in the long run. Mom nodded slowly. I thought I was shielding you all. From Linda's problems. From Richard's disapproval. From financial worry. But secrets hurt more in the end, I said softly. Look where we are now. We sat in silence for a moment, absorbing this truth. The Wilson family had always presented a perfect facade to the world, but beneath that surface, currents of secrecy and unspoken tension had been eroding our foundation for years. What about Aunt Linda? Michael asked. The money aside, she clearly needs help. Professional help, Jessica emphasized. Not just cash handouts when she hits rock bottom. Mom looked down at her hands. I know. I've always known. But she refuses long-term treatment. She'll accept money for rent or food or even a short rehab stay, but she won't commit to the real work of recovery. Then maybe the money needs to stop, I suggested gently. Maybe real love means setting boundaries. But she's my sister, Mom said, her voice breaking. I can't just abandon her. Supporting her recovery isn't abandonment, Michael pointed out. Enabling her addiction isn't love. A new thought occurred to me. Mom, did Dad ever actually say you couldn't help Linda at all? Or did he just refuse to give her money directly? Mom hesitated. He said she wasn't welcome in our home until she got help. That we wouldn't finance her addiction. But did he explicitly forbid you from helping her get treatment? I pressed. No, Mom admitted. I just assumed. You assumed he'd say no, so you never asked. I finished for her. And he assumed you were following his edict, so he never checked. 30 years of marriage, Jessica mused, and you two still don't know how to talk to each other. Despite everything, a small smile tugged at Mom's lips. That's probably fair. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Dad's number. I'm going to call him. Ask him to come back so we can talk this through properly. Mom looked alarmed. Amanda, he needs time. No, I said firmly. Time alone means time to build walls. We need to face this together, now, while everything's raw and honest. To my surprise, Dad answered on the second ring. His voice sounded tired but composed. I explained that we needed him to return, that running away wouldn't solve anything, that 30 years of marriage deserved at least one honest conversation before decisions were made. After a long pause, he agreed to come back. The 30 minutes we waited for his return were spent in meaningful silence, each of us processing the evening's revelations in our own way. When we heard his key in the lock, Mom straightened in her chair, smoothing her hair with shaking hands. Dad looked exhausted when he walked back into the dining room, the fight gone out of him. He took his seat at the head of the table without a word. Thank you for coming back, I said. He nodded once, his eyes on Mom.
30 years, he said simply.
I owed you that much. What followed was the most honest conversation our family had ever had. Mom explained in detail how Linda's addiction had progressed, the desperate phone calls in the middle of the night, the promises of recovery that never materialized. Dad listened without interrupting, his accountant's mind perhaps calculating the human cost alongside the financial one. When Mom finished, Dad spoke about his own feelings of betrayal, his fear that their entire marriage had been built on shifting sands. I thought we were partners, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That we made decisions together. We were, Mom insisted. We are. But you left no room for disagreement on this issue, Richard. It was your way or nothing. So you chose deception instead of confrontation, he observed. I chose both you and my sister, Mom corrected. Imperfectly, painfully, but that was my intention. Slowly, painfully, they began to establish new ground rules. Dad agreed that Linda deserved help, real help, not just financial band-aids. Mom admitted that her secretive approach had damaged their marriage and enabled her sister's addiction rather than treating it. From now on, we face problems together, Dad said, reaching tentatively for Mom's hand across the table. No matter how difficult the conversation might be. No more secret accounts, Mom promised. No more hidden agendas. And we help Aunt Linda properly, Michael added. As a family, with boundaries and expectations. A real treatment program, Jessica suggested. One she can't just walk away from when it gets tough. And if she refuses? Dad asked. Mom took a deep breath. Then we accept that we can't help someone who won't help themselves. Even if it breaks my heart. The conversation shifted to our family's broader communication issues. Michael admitted feeling pressure to follow Dad's career path rather than exploring his own interests. Jessica confessed to hiding her financial struggles out of pride and fear of judgment. I acknowledged my resentment over Dad's dismissal of my creative career. Dad listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time. I thought I was protecting you, he said finally. Teaching you to be strong, independent. I didn't realize I was pushing you away. You can guide without controlling, I told him. Support without directing. As the night deepened, we reached a fragile new understanding. Dad agreed to return home rather than staying at the lake house. Mom promised complete financial transparency going forward. Together, They would research treatment options for Aunt Linda, not as an open-ended financial commitment, but as a structured intervention with clear boundaries. 1 month later, we gathered for another family dinner. The atmosphere was different, more tentative, but also more authentic. Mom and Dad were seeing a marriage counselor. Aunt Linda had reluctantly agreed to enter a 6-month treatment program, with the understanding that it was the last financial help she would receive unless she completed the program. As we passed dishes around the table, I reflected on what I'd learned from our family crisis. Secrets meant to protect often cause more harm than the truth. Financial independence is valuable, but not at the expense of compassion and support. Judgment prevents honest communication. And real family strength comes not from presenting a perfect image, but from facing difficulties together with honesty and love. I have a question for everyone watching. I say now, looking directly at you through the screen. Has a family's secret ever come to light in your life? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these complicated family situations can be incredibly healing. And if you found this story meaningful, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more real-life family stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that families can heal even after devastating secrets come to light. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the truth may hurt temporarily, but secrets can damage permanently.